very short years ago. I sat right there where you are sitting, and I listened to my law school orientation speakers. And I listened to, at the time, my dean was Stuart Rabinowitz, the dean of the university. And I sat here and I listened to him tell me about all of the interesting people that were joining me as my fellow law students. And he said that among us were, the ones that I remember in particular, were a Miss America contestant, very impressive, a former detective, and even a personal assistant to the ABC Nightly News anchor, Peter Jennings. And in the audience, among us, as part of our fellow law students, was also this young woman from Farmingdale, New York, who was going to be the next Barbara Walters. Now, Stuart Rabinowitz did not say that. What he said was that this young woman was a moderator of a public access television show. And what he didn't know, but what I knew, was that I was going to be the next Barbara Walters. Now, at that time, what I also knew was that I had absolutely no intention of being a lawyer. I had no interest in being a lawyer. I was going to use my law school education to catapult me into fame and fortune as a television reporter. And then I went to my first law school class, and I went to my second law school class. And what started to happen to me was that I started to open my mind, and I started to experience things that I really never thought about experiencing before. And although it was a process, it was over the course of these 3 years that criminal law actually chose me. I found this strong desire within myself during my 3 years here to fight for justice, something that I really, truly never expected. Certainly never expected as I was sitting there listening at orientation like you are today. Now, I didn't start out as the person who had this burning need to represent the oppressed, to stand up and fight for the Constitution. I didn't start out as the bleeding heart liberal, as my father-in-law, my conservative father-in-law, very lovingly refers to me now. It was only over the course of time and through the experiences and the opportunities that Hofstra Law School afforded me that I really, really found out who I was and who I am today. So, if you'll indulge me, I want to take a few moments to talk to you about my 3 years here and about the 16 years that followed. As I stand here, I can tell you that there are 3 specific moments in time that stand out to me and that molded me into the lawyer that I did not know I wanted to be. Number 1, Adjunct Professor Pat McCloskey. Pat McCloskey was a professor. He taught courtroom criminal procedure. And at the time, he was the chief assistant district attorney in Nassau County. And his class was awesome. It was riveting. He captivated us. He made every single story he told interesting. I loved his class. And looking back on it, I think that most of his stories and most of the way he told us really had like a prosecutorial slant to it. Today I might have some other things to say to Pat McCloskey, but back then I could not get enough of his class. I wanted to learn everything there was to know about criminal law. And after his class, there would always be a group of us who would gather around and listen to him and ask him to tell us some more stories about crazy cases that he had handled in the Nassau DA's office. And one day, he offered me a summer internship at the DA's office. And I was so excited. I was thrilled. And I accepted his offer, and that summer I went to work as an intern at the Nassau County DA's office. And this was my first experience in really truly seeing the impact of our criminal justice system, the way that it affects people's lives, both the people who have been victimized and the people who are accused of crimes. And I remember that summer, they took us on a field trip to the Nassau County Medical Examiner's office. And I remember sitting in a room with my fellow interns, and we watched a video of all different crime scenes. I remember, a guy hanging. There were people with gunshot wounds and people who had been in the water for days and days and days before being recovered. And it was gruesome and it was gritty. And I remember them telling us about how they solved each of these cases and determined how the people had died, or if a crime was committed, how the evidence that they gathered helped them to really solve the crime. And it was riveting. But the one thing about that experience that stands out to me that I will never forget is when they walked us downstairs in the Nassau County Medical Center to the basement. And I can still remember that odor, this strong odor of like a mixture of death and formaldehyde. It was the most gruesome smell, and it was just thick in the air, and it got stronger and stronger and stronger with each step that we went down into this really desolate room. And they stood us just feet away from a metal gurney. And on that gurney laid the body of a woman who had been found dead in a car in the hot, hot summer after having been there for days. And it was just, it was more than I had ever imagined I would ever witness. And we watched, as we stood there, as they methodically sliced her open and performed an autopsy right before my eyes. That was crazy. It was crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. And years before, when I was interning at the NBC affiliate in Buffalo as a journalism major, I really never envisioned that I would be standing feet away from a body being autopsied. So that was pretty memorable. The other thing that they did for us that summer as interns is that they took us to the Nassau County Correctional Center. And I have to say, as a criminal defense attorney for the last 15 years, this is an experience that I have often reflected on, because it was just incredibly disturbing. And we were up close, just feet away from men and women who were caged in cells like animals. They were warehoused in this really dark and dank, terrible place. And I remember the guards walking us like single file along the tiers of cells, and they were yelling at us to make sure that we stayed as close to the wall as possible so that we didn't get struck by a cup of urine or a fistful of feces. It was really gruesome. And I remember the inmates, some of them screaming at us, some of them were really sexually vulgar, and it was just like a palpable experience. And as I walked through the tiers that day, I think that it was the first time that I really had a sense that there's something wrong with this. There's really something wrong with this. And that same summer, I watched a murder trial for the very first time while I was in the Nassau County DA's office in the county court building, and it was riveting. And I thought to myself, I'm going to do that. I can do that. I can fight for justice. I can uphold the Constitution. there was no doubt in my mind that summer that I, without question, could represent the people of the state of New York. I could be a prosecutor, no doubt in my mind. And, at that time, there was never a notion that I would actually want to represent the defendant, the person who had been accused of the murder or having committed these crimes, because, there were plenty of other people that could deal with that unpleasant task, but it was not going to be me. I was going to be a prosecutor. And on a side note here, I think he's actually in the audience here. There's a professor at this school right now whose class you should, without question, take, because he was one of the best assistant district attorneys that I've ever had the privilege of watching in the Nassau County DA's office. And at the time that I was an intern in law school, Fred Klein was the head of the Major Offense Bureau at the Nassau County DA's office. And I interviewed with Fred Klein because I was going to be a prosecutor. And I think I remember delivering an opening statement to him that I thought was really riveting, frankly. Apparently, Professor Klein did not agree. And I did not make his cut. So I did not become a prosecutor at the Nassau County DA's office. But I like to think that is only because Mr. Klein had dealt with so many really true, good, brilliant criminal defense attorneys that really he could smell me, and he knew that I was not a prosecutor. That's the story that I'm going with. But I was going to be a prosecutor, and if I was going to be a prosecutor, then I needed to learn everything there was to know about trying a case. And so my number 2 pivotal moment in my 3 years here at Hofstra was when I decided to engross myself in every single trial techniques program that the law school had to offer, and there were many. I took NIDA, which was the Intensive Trial Techniques program taught by Professor Kessler, and now also taught by Professor Barron. It's offered like in the winter when you should be on vacation and enjoying yourself, and I want every single one of you to promise me that you will take that course, because it was truly a life changer for me, and it was just a wonderful opportunity. Advanced Trial Techniques, which was taught by an adjunct professor by the name of Ben Rabinowitz, who is an outstanding trial attorney. I'm privileged to have him as a friend to me today, and I still admire him, I respect him, and I do my very best to emulate him to this day. That class was so inspirational, and these experiences forced me for the very first time to stand up, as uncomfortable as it is sometimes, and to be an advocate. It was the first time that I learned that there's so much more to a trial than what actually goes on inside of a courtroom. And I joined the Hofstra's trial team. That was the coolest thing ever. I loved being on the trial team. And with Professors Krieger and Kessler, we traveled to Rhode Island. We went to San Antonio, Texas, and took part in a national trial competition. Still one of the greatest experiences that I've ever had. And we came in first place, brought the winning trophy home to Hofstra Law School, which is a really cool experience. And I was sold. I belonged in a courtroom. No doubt in my mind, I was going to be a trial attorney. And what sealed this for me, number 3, was the Criminal Justice Clinic. Because that was where I finally came to realize that defendants actually have names. They have families. And they're not all evildoers. Sometimes good people really do stupid things. And it's the first time that I learned that I could be someone's voice, that I could fight zealously, that I could fight for someone without judgment, and that I had an obligation to ensure that that person, regardless of their circumstances, should be treated justly and fairly under our laws. And so I graduated from this school in 1997. And when I sat there in 1994, I never imagined that the experiences that I had here at Hofstra would give me the foundation one day to represent an Al-Qaeda terrorist. Just a few years ago, he was a young American, and he was accused of masterminding a plot to blow up the New York City subway system. And the plot included allegedly planting a bomb at the Wall Street subway station, which happens to be at the base of my office building. So this was the case, the one case that was for me the true test of who I was and who I always professed to be. And I will tell you, quite candidly, that it was not an easy decision for me, my partner, or anybody in our law firm. In fact, there were people in our firm who said, if we were going to represent this guy, I'm out of here. Some of our family members thought we were completely nuts for even considering taking on this case. In fact, I received an email one day from a fellow criminal defense attorney who happened to have an office in our office building. And the email called into question my morals. How dare you consider representing this person? Because do you realize, Celia, that if he had been successful in his plot, he would have blown you to smithereens, and you would have been of no use to him today. So how dare you? Well, ironically, that really struck me. And it struck me because we realized we never really had a choice. It was an email like that really drove home the point that when you are a true criminal defense attorney, and as a true citizen of this wonderful country that we live in, there is an ideal, and it's an ideal that I believe in, and I hope that all of you will believe in. And Robert F. Kennedy once very eloquently stated it. It should be clear, if one man's rights are denied, the rights of all of us are in danger. That if one man is denied equal protection of law, we cannot be sure that we will enjoy the freedom of speech or any of our other fundamental rights. That strikes you to the core. And that's what it's all about. And so over the course of my 16 years as a criminal defense attorney, when I was asked to represent a serial rapist, a man who was accused of rape numerous times before, a man who had been remanded in jail, awaiting trial for 2 years, I didn't hesitate. Along with my partner, Robert Gottlieb, we zealously, we vigorously, and without judgment, represented this person and tried the case. Personally, I despise this guy. Morally, I loathed him. And after hours of the jury deliberating, there was a knock on the door. There was a verdict. And do you know, he turned to me right at that moment, and he said, "Will you hold my hand?" know what? I said no. And the jury came back, and the jury said, not guilty. And he cried. He sat there and he cried. But I didn't. And you know, since then, I've been asked many times if I feel responsible for having let a rapist go free. My answer to that question will always be a resounding no. And the reason for that is because if there had been enough evidence in that case, he would have been convicted. And I truly believe that if there isn't enough evidence on which a jury can base its verdict, then no man or woman, regardless of the situation or the circumstances, should ever be convicted or incarcerated for that crime. In a lot of cases, like in that one, it's a really hard pill to swallow. And it would be so easy to just push that ideal aside when you're really staring in the face of evil. But you know what? It is that basic, fundamental principle that in the end really protects each and every one of us. And it protected a 17-year-old girl that I represented a number of years ago named Katie. Katie had just finished her senior year of high school. She just got her driver's license. Remember that? Remember that day? We all remember that day. Get your driver's license. You can't wait. You're going to get in your car with your friends. You're just going to go anywhere. It didn't even matter where. It was such a liberating, such a great day. Her dad had just bought her a new car, a black Honda Civic. And that very day, Katie and her very best friend got in her car, and they were going to drive to a party. And they were driving down Salisbury Park Drive, which is actually very close to here. And Katie was a really inexperienced driver. And there's a very dangerous curve on Salisbury Park Drive. And Katie was driving around that curve too fast. And her car hit a pole, and her best friend was killed. And at that moment, Katie's life changed indescribably, forever. After about a year, she started to move on, get her life back in order, and she was charged with vehicular manslaughter. Katie was everybody's daughter. Katie was every one of us at 17 years old. If Katie was convicted, she was going to be spending years behind bars, in a cage, living a nightmare in an upstate prison. She was scared. I was scared. Her trial lasted for about 2 weeks. And when the jury knocked on the door, they had reached a verdict. And I took Katie's hand. And when the jury came in, and the judge asked Katie to stand and face the jury, we stood together. And when the foreperson in that case said, not guilty, the wave of emotion that I felt, I feel it right now, it's still one of those cases that I look back on and I can feel it like it was yesterday. And Katie cried, and I cried. 7 years after that trial, I stood and I cried with Katie again. this time as I watched her walk down the aisle at her wedding. And since then, I've had the privilege and the honor of seeing her grow to be a mother of 2 beautiful little girls. Now, clearly, my feelings about these 3 clients of mine, my personal feelings, are drastically different. But you know what? Professionally, they were all exactly the same. No difference at all. So, I'm not here to convince you that the only noble path for you to choose at the end of these 3 years is to be a criminal defense attorney, even if I believe that. My message to all of you, as you sit here today, is to be open. Over the next 3 years, make a promise to yourselves. Promise yourselves that you will explore areas of the law that you might not have otherwise considered. Promise yourselves that if your mother and father or your aunt or your uncle have a law firm and you've worked there as a file clerk in the past, work someplace else this summer. Do something different. Take a class in a subject that does not interest you at all. Dive into opportunities that at first may seem uncomfortable. And take advantage of the trial programs. Take advantage of every single one of them that you can get your hands on while you're here, because I promise you that your experience will be invaluable. They will give you confidence. They'll expand your mind, and they will help you in whatever profession you choose. Now is your time to grow. And at the end of these 3 years, maybe you, like me, will find yourself chosen by a particular area of the law. Maybe you'll wind up doing exactly what you're thinking of right now. Maybe some of you will even be the next Barbara Walters. But my hope for you, like me, is that you can find the passion in whatever it is you choose to do. That whatever you do, you feel it in your core, that it excites you, and that it always keeps you on your toes. Because there is a world to be born under your footsteps. And today, as you sit here, allow yourself to just say, I don't yet know what that world is. I wish each and every one of you the best of luck.